Winterfell was quiet the night the wind began to howl. The snow fell harder than before, covering every stone, every tree, every tower of the old castle. Arya Stark, now grown into a fighter, sat alone in the courtyard, sharpening her blade. She heard the sound of the wolves crying in the distance, and something about their voices felt different, like they were warning her of something coming closer. In the great hall, Sansa was sitting with the northern lords, discussing how to rebuild their lands after the war. She was careful with her words, calm and queenly, but deep inside her heart she still carried a weight of fear. She had learned to trust no one, not even allies, for betrayal had followed her family since the day her father, Ned Stark, was killed in King's Landing. But on this night, something strange happened. Bran, who now lived with strange visions of the past and future, sat in silence near the fire. His eyes turned white as his mind wandered into the unknown. He saw shadows of the dead walking in the snow, and in the middle of that darkness, a figure appeared. Strong shoulders, a long face, and eyes filled with pain, but also honor. It was their father, Eddard Stark. The vision was so strong that Bran gasped, and everyone turned toward him. Sansa asked what he had seen, but Bran only whispered, "He is not at rest. Father has returned." That same night, Arya felt a cold hand brush past her as she trained with her blade. She spun around, thinking it was only the wind, but then she heard a voice she had not heard in years. A voice deep and steady, filled with sorrow and strength. "Arya," the voice said. Her sword almost slipped from her hand. She turned, and there in the dim light of the courtyard stood the shadow of a man. His body was mist, but his face was clear. His eyes looked at her with the love of a father and the sadness of a ghost. "Father?" Arya whispered, her throat tight. Ned Stark's ghost stood in silence for a moment. Snow blew through his form, but he did not fade. He looked at Arya, then to the towers of Winterfell, and then to the dark woods beyond. "The North remembers," he said. "But it is not enough. Danger is coming again. I could not protect you when I lived, but I will not leave you now." Arya's heart pounded. She wanted to run to him, but he was only shadow, only memory. Still, she felt warmth in her chest, a strength she had forgotten. For the first time in years, she felt like a little girl again, standing in the yard, hearing her father's voice teaching her about honor. The wolves howled louder that night, and the lords in the hall felt a chill run through their bones. Somewhere deep in Winterfell, Sansa too felt a strange calmness, like an unseen hand was watching over them. Ned Stark had returned, not in flesh, but in spirit, and he had come not to haunt his family, but to protect them. But ghosts do not return without reason, and the North was about to face a darkness far more dangerous than they imagined. The next morning, Winterfell seemed uneasy. The sky was pale grey, and even the fire in the great hall burned lower than usual. Sansa sat at the high table, listening to the reports from the northern bannermen, but she felt distracted. Her nights had been restless, filled with dreams of her father's face, his voice echoing in the snow. She thought they were only dreams, but when she looked at Arya, she saw the same unease in her sister's eyes. Arya had not slept. She had spent the whole night thinking about what she had seen in the courtyard. She wanted to tell Sansa, but part of her feared that no one would believe her. Still, her father's voice had been so clear, so real. It was not a dream. It was something else. By midday, she could not hold it anymore. She pulled Sansa aside, away from the lords and soldiers. "I saw him," Arya whispered. Sansa frowned. "Saw who?" "Our father," Arya said, her voice trembling with both fear and excitement. "He came to me last night. I could hear him. I could see him. He's here, Sansa." Sansa's lips pressed together. For a moment, she wanted to scold Arya, to tell her that grief still haunted her mind. But the truth was, she had felt something too. A strange presence in the hall, like a watchful shadow. She had woken in the night, convinced someone was standing at her bedside, though the chamber had been empty. Before she could answer, Bran entered the room. His pale eyes stared at them, cold as snow. "It's true," he said softly. He has returned. Arya's head snapped toward him. You've seen him too. Bran nodded slowly. I saw his spirit walk in the old crypts. He is bound to Winterfell, but he is not at peace. He came back because something else is coming. Sansa's chest tightened. What is coming? Bran's gaze was distant, as though he were watching a storm beyond the horizon. The dead may have fallen, but the living are worse. Old grudges, old enemies. They stir in the dark, waiting. And father, he feels it. Arya's heart pounded with both dread and determination. Then let him come to us again. I want to speak with him. That night, Arya returned to the courtyard where she had seen him. She waited in the snow, her sword by her side, her breath rising in white clouds. Hours passed, and the cold bit into her skin, but she did not move. At last, when the moon broke through the clouds, the air grew colder. The torches flickered low, and a shape appeared before her. The same tall figure, the same solemn face. Eddard Stark, Arya's throat tightened. Father. The ghost's eyes were heavy with sorrow. His voice was softer now, yet it carried across the snow. Arya, you have grown into the warrior I once feared you would be, and the one I prayed you might become. Tears stung her eyes, but Arya kept her voice steady. Why are you here? Tell me the truth. Ned's shadowy face turned toward the walls of Winterfell. His words came slow, like stone breaking from ice. The north is not safe. Your enemies still breathe. They whisper in the dark, waiting for weakness. You will face betrayal not from strangers, but from those who wear the face of friends. Arya felt her hand tighten around her sword. Who are they? Tell me their names. But Ned only shook his head. I cannot speak their names. The living must uncover the truth. I can only warn you. Trust carefully, Arya. The wolves must stand together, or the pack will fall once more. Arya swallowed hard, her chest aching. She wanted to ask him 100 more questions, but his figure began to fade into the snow. Desperate, she reached out. Wait, don't leave me again. For just a moment, his ghostly hand brushed hers. Cold, empty, but filled with a father's love. Then he was gone. Arya fell to her knees in the snow, her breath shaking. She had seen him, spoken to him, and his warning was clear. Betrayal was coming. The next morning she told Sansa everything. Sansa listened, her face pale, her fingers twisting together in unease. She did not doubt Arya's words. She had lived long enough in the Game of Thrones to know betrayal always came from the ones closest. We must be careful, Sansa whispered. No one can know of this, not yet. If Father warns us, we cannot take it lightly. We must watch everyone, even those we call allies. But even as she spoke, there was a shadow in her heart. Because deep down, Sansa wondered, what if the betrayal was not from the lords, but from within her own family? And in the silence of the crypts below Winterfell, Ned Stark's ghost stood once more among the stone statues of his ancestors. His face was carved with grief. He had spoken to Arya, warned her as much as he could, but he knew the hardest truth still remained unspoken. His children would not only face enemies outside the walls, but dark choices inside their own bloodline. The cold wind howled across Winterfell that night, rattling the windows of the great hall and whistling through the old stones of the castle. Sansa lay in her chambers, staring at the ceiling. Sleep would not come. Arya's words haunted her. Father had spoken of betrayal, of enemies in the dark, and Sansa could not shake the thought that danger was already closer than they realized. Her candle burned low, filling the chamber with a dim, golden light. She rose from her bed and wrapped herself in a heavy fur cloak, pacing across the room. A strange unease pressed against her chest, a weight she could not explain. She had ruled Winterfell with strength, with calm, with fire in her voice when needed. Yet here in the quiet of the night, she felt small again, like the little girl who once dreamed of songs, of knights, of a golden crown. And then she felt it. A coldness brushed her cheek, though the windows were shut. The air grew heavy, and the candlelight flickered. Slowly she turned, and her breath caught. A shadow stood in the corner of the room. Tall, broad-shouldered, with a familiar face half lit by the trembling flame, her lips parted in disbelief.
Father?
The ghost of Eddard Stark did not move at first. His eyes, dark pools of sorrow, met hers. His voice, when it came, was low and steady, like the memory of winter storms. "Sansa, my little bird." Her knees weakened, and she gripped the edge of her bed for balance. She had not heard that voice in so many years, not since the day his head was struck from his shoulders in King's Landing. Tears pricked at her eyes, but she forced them down, standing tall. You should not be here," she whispered. "The dead don't return." Ned's ghost stepped forward, though his body seemed made of smoke and frost. "I could not rest. I left you all unprotected once. I will not leave again." Her throat ached, but she managed to steady her voice. "Arya told me you warned her. You spoke of betrayal." He nodded slowly, his gaze lowering. "The North is your home, but even here not all who bow to you are true. Power breeds envy. Blood calls for blood. Be wary, Sansa. The knife will come not from strangers, but from those who sit at your table." Her hands tightened at her sides. She thought of the Northern lords, the bannermen who had sworn to her as queen in the North. Many had fought bravely, but she knew well enough how quickly loyalty could be bought or broken. "Tell me who," she pressed. "Tell me their names." But Ned's eyes filled with pain. "The dead cannot name the living. I can only warn you. Watch, listen, trust little. Even wolves can turn on their own." Sansa's breath caught at those last words. Even wolves. Did he mean her family? Did he mean Arya or Bran? Her chest tightened with fear. She wanted to reach for him, to beg him to speak plainly, but his form was already beginning to fade, as though the shadows of the room swallowed him whole. "Wait!" she cried out, her voice breaking. "Please don't leave me again." His fading hand reached out, almost brushing her cheek. His voice was softer now, almost a whisper lost to the wind. "Be strong, Sansa. The pack survives." But only together, and then he was gone. Sansa collapsed onto her bed, her body shaking. She pressed her hand to her face, but the tears came anyway. She had dreamed for so long of hearing her father's voice again, but now his words burned in her heart. Wolves turning on their own, betrayal within. The thought was too much to bear. The next morning she sat in the great hall at the high table. Her eyes scanned the faces of the Northern lords as they feasted, laughed, and drank. To any other, it might look like a hall filled with loyalty and pride, but Sansa saw shadows now. Every smile could hide a dagger. Every cheer could mask a plan. Austria entered the hall, her expression sharp as always. She moved like a blade herself, quick and silent, sitting across from Sansa. Their eyes met for a moment, and both knew the other had been touched by their father's ghost. But neither spoke of it openly. Bran, in his chair by the fire, said nothing. Yet when Sansa's gaze fell on him, his pale eyes stared back at her, unblinking, as if he already knew the storm gathering in her mind. That night, the howling of the wolves echoed louder than before, a chorus that shook Winterfell's walls. The servants whispered that the beasts had grown restless, circling the woods like they sensed something unseen. Some said it was a bad omen. Others said the spirits of the old kings were stirring in their graves. But Arya, Sansa, and Bran knew the truth. Ned Stark was walking Winterfell again, and his warnings were not empty. The days that followed were uneasy. Winterfell was alive with voices and footsteps, but beneath the noise there was a silence that pressed on everyone. The servants whispered that the wolves howled too often now, louder than before, as if calling to someone unseen. The soldiers grew restless, eyes shifting at shadows on the walls. Sansa carried herself like a queen, calm and poised, but inside her heart was restless. Her father's ghost had not come again, yet his warning clung to her thoughts like frost on stone. Every lord who bent the knee, every bannerman who raised his cup in her hall, she saw them now with suspicion. Which one would betray her? Which one carried the hidden knife? Arya noticed it too. She spent her days watching, slipping through the halls like a shadow herself. The faceless men had taught her well, and no whisper or glance escaped her sharp eyes. She began to see things others overlooked. A northern lord's servant exchanging letters in secret, a bannerman's wife whispering too long with one of the guards. None of it seemed large, but Arya knew how small cracks became great breaks. One evening, As the snow piled heavy against Winterfell's walls, Arya went to Bran. He sat in his chair near the fire, as he often did, his eyes distant and his body still. She stood before him, arms crossed, and said in a sharp voice, "You've seen him too, father." Bran's pale eyes flicked toward her. "Yes," Arya stepped closer. "He warned me." "He warned Sansa, but he won't speak plainly. You see more than us. What is he trying to tell us?" Bran's voice was flat, like stone. "He warns of betrayal because it is close." "Closer than you think," her jaw tightened. "Then tell me who. Give me their face." But Bran's gaze seemed to drift beyond the room, as though he were watching another time, another place. Names mean little. Choices matter more. What he fears is not only enemies outside our walls. He fears what may rise between us. Arya's chest went cold. "Between us? You mean family?" Bran did not answer, but his silence was heavier than words. Arya's anger flared. "I would never betray Sansa, or you, or Jon." Still, Bran said nothing. His eyes, pale and endless, only stared. Arya's hand gripped the hilt of her sword. "Say it plain, Bran. If you know something, tell me." But he closed his eyes, retreating into one of his endless visions, leaving her with nothing but her own racing thoughts. That same night, Sansa sat alone in her chambers, staring at the flames in her hearth. She felt the weight of Winterfell pressing down on her. The Northern Lords looked to her for strength, but she could not shake the ghost of her father's words. Wolves can turn on their own. She thought of Arya, wild, sharp, dangerous in ways Sansa could not control. She thought of Bran, strange and distant, more spirit than brother now. And she thought of Jon, far away, whose loyalty was true, but who always seemed pulled toward another destiny. Her eyes burned with exhaustion when the room grew cold again. The fire flickered low, though no wind touched it. She did not turn immediately. She knew what it meant. Slowly she lifted her gaze, and there he stood once more, her father Ned Stark's ghost. "Sansa," he said softly, his voice carrying both sorrow and pride. "You wear Winterfell's crown, but you also wear its burdens." She rose to her feet, her cloak falling from her shoulders. "Why do you speak in riddles? If you mean to protect us, speak plain." His face was shadow, but his eyes seemed almost alive. "Because plain words will not save you. You must see for yourself. You must learn to trust no whisper, no oath, no smile." Her hands trembled, but she stood tall. "You make me doubt everyone. Even my own blood." His gaze did not soften. "That doubt may save you." Her breath caught. She wanted to scream, to cry, to demand more, but his shape began to fade again, dissolving into the cold air. She reached out, but her fingers touched nothing, only the bitter chill of his absence. When he was gone, Sansa sank into her chair, tears slipping down her cheeks despite her will. The fire crackled softly, but it gave no warmth. The next morning she met Arya in the courtyard. Snowflakes clung to their hair as they faced one another, silence heavy between them. Neither spoke of the ghost, neither spoke of betrayal. But their eyes said enough. Both knew their father had warned them, both knew danger crept closer. And both in their hearts began to wonder, could they truly trust even each other? Above them, the direwolves howled again, their cries echoing across the snowy woods. It was as if they, too, felt the ghost of Ned Stark walking the grounds, restless, watchful, mourning. In the crypts below, where the stone statues of Stark ancestors stood in silent rows, Ned's spirit lingered. He moved among the dead like a shadow, bound by sorrow. His whispers brushed the cold walls. He had warned his daughters, spoken to his son, but still the truth lay hidden in silence, for the betrayal he feared most was not yet revealed. It was waiting, and it was closer than any of them could bear to believe. Snowstorms beat against the walls of Winterfell, shaking the castle with their fury. The north was locked in endless white, but inside the halls the coldest winds were not those from outside. They came from the looks passed between sisters. Arya watched Sansa more than ever now. Her sharp eyes missed nothing. The way Sansa whispered privately with her bannermen, the way she weighed her words carefully, the way she carried secrets in her silence. Arya remembered their father's warning, The knife would come not from strangers, but from those who sit at your table. And wasn't Sansa seated at the very highest table of them all? But Sansa, too, was watching Arya. The way her younger sister disappeared for hours, slipping through shadows like a ghost. The way her hands never strayed far from the hilt of her blade. Sansa remembered her father's words as well. Even wolves can turn on their own. Could Arya be the wolf her father had meant? They loved one another still, but suspicion had coiled like a snake in their hearts. One night Arya entered the great hall and found Sansa speaking in hushed tones with Lord Manderley's heir. They fell silent the moment they noticed her. Arya's jaw tightened. She walked slowly across the hall, her boots echoing on the stone, her eyes fixed on Sansa's. "What were you whispering about?" Arya asked. Sansa's expression froze, her voice steady but clipped. "Matters of food stores. Nothing more. Nothing more," Arya repeated softly, almost mocking. Her fingers brushed the edge of the dagger at her side. Sansa rose from her seat, her cloak falling behind her. "You think I plot against you?" "Against us?" Arya tilted her head, her smile thin and sharp. "I think you've been queen long enough to know how to hide a plot." For a long, breathless moment they stared at each other, sisters bound by blood, but pulled apart by doubt. Then Sansa turned away, her voice colder than the winter wind. "Careful, Arya. Doubt is a blade that cuts both ways." That night, Arya did not sleep. She walked the halls, restless, the ghost of her father's voice echoing in her mind. She wanted to trust Sansa. She wanted to believe that their bond was stronger than any betrayal. But doubt had been planted, and it grew like a dark root in her heart. Meanwhile, Bran sat alone near the godswood, his pale eyes staring into the frozen heart-tree. His body was still, but his mind was not. He slipped into visions, carried on the winds of time and shadow. He saw his father's face, stern, sorrowful, standing in the crypts. Ned's ghost whispered without sound, pointing into the darkness beyond. Bran followed, his vision stretching through Winterfell's walls, into the great hall, into the council chambers. He saw lords bending low, whispering with one another, their voices lost but their eyes sharp with intent. Then the vision darkened. A shadowy figure appeared, hooded, faceless in the mist. The figure drew a dagger, its blade glinting red as blood. The dagger rose not against strangers, but against one of his own kin. Bran gasped, feeling his chest tighten. The vision blurred, but one detail cut through the fog. The dagger's hilt bore the mark of the direwolf. It was a stark blade. Bran's eyes snapped open, his breath ragged. His father's ghost was there beside him in the vision still, his face heavy with grief. "Tell them," Ned's voice echoed. "Warn them before it is too late." But Bran's heart ached, because even he did not know which hand would raise that dagger. The next morning, Bran asked for Arya and Sansa to meet him in the godswood. They came reluctantly, their eyes wary, their movements stiff with unspoken tension. Snowflakes drifted between them as they stood beneath the red branches of the weirwood. "I have seen what father fears," Bran said quietly. "The betrayer carries a stark blade. The hand that will strike is not a stranger's." Sansa's face went pale. Arya's eyes burned with fire. "You mean one of us," Arya said. Bran's voice was calm, but each word fell heavy. "I saw no face, only the blade." "But it was ours." Sansa's breath shook as she turned toward her sister. "Is this why he warned us? Is this what he meant? That the knife will come from within our pack?" Arya's voice was sharp as steel. "Or maybe you already know who holds that knife." The silence that followed was thick, dangerous. The snow fell harder, covering the ground between them, white as bone. Bran sat still, watching them both. He did not speak again, for he knew words would not heal what was already breaking. In the shadows of the trees, unseen by them, Ned Stark's ghost lingered. His face was carved with sorrow, his form flickering like dying flame. He had tried to protect them, tried to warn them, but now the prophecy of betrayal was no longer a distant threat. It had begun to poison the very blood it was meant to save, and the dead could only watch as the living walked toward their fate. The walls of Winterfell had never felt so heavy. The snow piled higher each day, but it was not the storms outside that weighed on the castle. It was the storm within. Sansa ruled from the high seat with her usual grace, but her voice carried an edge now. Every order was firm, every question sharper than before. She began demanding more reports from her lords, inspecting their movements, searching for cracks in loyalty. The council noticed the change. Whispers spread through the halls. The Queen grows restless. The Queen trusts no one. Arya's presence was even more unsettling. She walked the castle like a shadow, her boots silent, her eyes piercing. Some guards swore they woke in the night to find her standing in the darkness, watching them, only to vanish when they blinked. She hunted whispers the way she once hunted prey, and soon no one in Winterfell felt unseen, but it was not the lords or soldiers who felt the greatest weight of their suspicion. It was each other. One night, the two sisters met again in Sansa's chambers. The fire burned low, throwing long shadows across the stone walls. Arya entered without knocking, her eyes fixed on her sister. "You've been hiding something," Arya said flatly. Sansa's chin lifted, her expression cool. "I hide nothing from you. You've been skulking through shadows like a thief in your own home." Arya's lips curled into a smirk, though her eyes were cold. "Better a thief than a liar." Sansa rose from her chair, her silken gown trailing across the floor. "You think I plot against you? Against our family? You're blinded by Father's warning, twisting it into paranoia." "Paranoia?" Arya stepped closer, her hand brushing the dagger at her side. "Or maybe I see clearer than you. Father said betrayal comes from those closest. Who is closer to me than my sister, my queen?" The silence burned between them. The fire popped in the hearth, and for a moment, both sisters looked like wolves ready to bare their teeth. But then another voice filled the room, low, familiar, heavy with sorrow. "Enough." Both women froze. The air grew cold, the flames dimmed, and there he stood. Their father, Eddard Stark's ghost, filled the chamber, his tall form cloaked in shadow, his face as solemn as the statues in the crypt. His eyes swept over his daughters, heavy with grief. "You shame me," he said. Sansa's breath caught. Arya's hand slipped from her dagger. They looked at him like children again, stripped of their anger in the presence of the man they had loved and lost. "Father," Sansa whispered, her voice trembling, but Ned's ghost shook his head. "I fought to keep you safe. I died with your names on my lips, and now I see my daughters turning their blades on each other." Tears welled in Arya's eyes, though she tried to mask them with steel. "You told us there would be betrayal. You made us doubt." Ned's voice was like stone cracking. "I warned you to be cautious, not to destroy yourselves. The pack survives together or falls apart in pieces." Sansa stepped forward, her face pale, her hands shaking. "Then tell us, Father. Tell us who it is. End this torment before it kills us." But Ned's ghost's expression grew darker, heavier. "I cannot. The dead are bound to shadows, not names. You must see for yourselves. But hear me, both of you. If you let mistrust guide your hearts, you will become the very betrayal you fear." The room grew colder still. His form flickered like smoke, his voice fading with the last echo of the fire. "Remember, you are Starks of Winterfell. Wolves, not prey. Do not forget." And then he was gone. The sisters stood in silence, the air heavy with their father's absence. Arya's chest heaved as she turned away, pacing the room like a caged beast. Sansa's tears spilled quietly, her hand gripping the edge of the table for strength. But though they had both heard their father's plea, the poison of suspicion had already sunk deep into their veins. That night, Arya dreamed of a dagger dripping with blood, its hilt carved with the Stark direwolf. She woke with her hand gripping her blade, sweat cold on her brow. Sansa too dreamed. She saw herself on the high seat of Winterfell, alone, the hall empty, the silence deafening. When she looked down, her hands were red with blood. Bran did not dream. He saw. His visions grew sharper, darker. He saw a blade raised in the halls of Winterfell. He saw sisters standing against each other, wolves circling, teeth bared. He saw his father's ghost weeping in the crypts, unable to stop what was coming, and when he woke, his voice was colder than the snow outside. It is too late. The pack is already breaking. The snowstorm that night seemed endless, howling against the walls of Winterfell, as if the very north was crying out in warning. The castle's fires burned low, shadows stretching long across the stone corridors. Soldiers whispered in the halls that something was wrong in the keep, that the wolves of Winterfell were turning restless. Inside, Sansa sat at the high table, her face pale, her crown heavy. She had just dismissed the Lords of the North after another long council, and yet their words gnawed at her mind. Too many questions about food, too many talks of defense, too many worried looks at Arya's shadowy movements. It felt like the Lords trusted her less with each passing day. When Arya entered the hall, silent as a knife, the air grew tense. Her eyes locked on Sansa's, sharp and burning. The few servants who lingered quickly scattered, leaving only the two sisters beneath the flickering torchlight. "You've been speaking to the Lords behind my back," Arya said, her voice low but cutting. Sansa straightened her shoulders. "I am their queen. I must speak with them." Arya stepped closer, her hand brushing the dagger at her hip. "Do they know your secrets too? Or do you keep those just for me?" Sansa's eyes narrowed. "You think yourself clever, skulking in shadows and spying on your own blood. But I see you too, Arya. You frighten the men of this castle. You frighten me." The word struck harder than a blade. Arya froze, her breath sharp. "You fear me," she whispered, almost in disbelief. Then her smirk returned, cruel and cold. "Good, you should." Her hand closed around her dagger. The steel glinted in the firelight. Sansa's face paled, but she did not back away. She lifted her chin, her voice steady even as her heart raced. "So this is it? Father's warning fulfilled. You raise your knife against me." Arya's knuckles whitened on the hilt. Her pulse thundered in her ears. For a moment, the room shrank until there was only her sister, and the memory of their father's voice. "The knife will come not from strangers, but from those who sit at your table." The silence broke with the sound of steel. Arya's dagger left its sheath in a flash. Sansa gasped, but did not scream. She stood frozen, her eyes wide, her hands clutching the table, and then the air turned colder than death. The torches dimmed, the shadows deepened, and a voice thundered through the hall. "Enough!" Both sisters spun around, the dagger trembling in Arya's grip. And there he was, taller, clearer than ever before. Their father, Eddard Stark's ghost, strode through the great hall, his face carved with fury and sorrow. His eyes blazed like dark fire, and his voice shook the stones themselves. "Is this what you have become? My daughters, wolves turning their fangs on each other." Arya's breath caught. Her hand loosened on the dagger, but she did not drop it. Sansa's knees weakened, tears brimming in her eyes. "Father," she whispered. Ned's ghost pointed at Arya, his voice like thunder. "Would you spill your sister's blood? Would you break the pack with your own hand?" Arya's lips parted, her breath ragged. "You warned us. You said betrayal would come from within, and now you make it true." Ned roared. The hall seemed to shake with his grief. His form flickered, his shadow stretching across the walls. He turned to Sansa, his face heavy with pain. "And you, Sansa, you feed the doubt with whispers, with fear, until it poisons your bond. You call yourself queen, but a queen without her pack is nothing but prey." Tears spilled down Sansa's cheeks. "I never wanted this. I only wanted to protect our people." Ned's ghost's voice softened, though it carried no less weight. "Then protect them by standing together, not apart. You are all I left this world. If you destroy each other, then everything I bled for was in vain." Arya's dagger slipped from her hand, clattering onto the stone floor. Her chest heaved as tears stung her eyes. Though she tried to hide them behind anger, Sansa collapsed into her chair. Uncovering her face with trembling hands, Ned's ghost stepped closer, his form flickering like dying flame. His eyes lingered on them both, filled with sorrow deeper than death. "The enemy you fear will come, but if you meet it divided, you will fall. The North will fall, And the name of Stark will be nothing but ashes. The fire roared suddenly high, lighting the hall in red. His form faded into smoke, his voice lingering in the cold air. Remember who you are. Remember the pack. And then he was gone. The sisters sat in silence, the echo of his fury still hanging in the hall. Neither spoke. Neither moved, but both knew the truth. They had walked to the edge of betrayal, and only their father's ghost had pulled them back. Yet the fear in their hearts remained. The prophecy still hung over them. The blade was yet to fall, and somewhere in the depths of Winterfell, Bran stirred in his bed, his pale eyes snapping open. He had seen another vision, the true face of the betrayer, hidden still in shadows, but closer than anyone could imagine. Winterfell was wrapped in silence, the kind that comes before a storm. Snow fell steady, blanketing the courtyard, muffling footsteps, muting voices. But inside the great hall, voices were sharp, the air heavy with unease. The bannermen sensed something was wrong between the Stark sisters. They were loyal to the crown of the North, but they whispered of cracks in Winterfell's heart. Bran called for his sisters to meet him in the Godswood. Arya and Sansa came reluctantly, their steps slow, their eyes full of suspicion. The heart tree stood silent, its red leaves unmoving in the still air, the carved face staring down with sadness. Bran sat beneath it, pale and rigid, his gaze distant. When the sisters stood before him, he spoke without preamble. "I have seen it." The betrayer! Arya stiffened, her hand brushing the hilt of her dagger. Sansa's breath caught in her throat. Bran's voice was low, steady. "It is not you, Arya. It is not you, Sansa. You have doubted each other, but that was not the betrayal Father warned us of. The true hand belongs to another, someone who wears our name, someone who carries our blood." Sansa's face went white. "Jon?" Arya's eyes narrowed. "No, not Jon." Bran shook his head. "Not Jon, not you, not me. But blood still." The words struck like a hammer. The sisters stared at him, their minds racing through names, through kin, cousins, bastards, forgotten branches of the Stark line. Bran's pale eyes grew distant again, and when he spoke, it was with the weight of prophecy. "There is one who hides in shadow, one who claims to fight for the North, but covets it instead. They will raise a Stark blade against us. That is the betrayal." Sansa's hands trembled. "Who?" she demanded. Before Bran could answer, the air grew cold. The wind shifted, carrying a voice heavy with sorrow. Enough! They turned, and there he was again, the ghost of Ned Stark, standing beneath the heart tree. His form was clearer than ever before, his eyes glimmering with both love and despair. "You seek names," he said, his voice echoing through the Godswood. "But names are not what matter. Fear has already poisoned you. It has made you blind. You will find your betrayer soon enough, but if you face it divided, you will fall." Arya stepped forward, her voice sharp with frustration. "You keep warning us, but you give us nothing. Tell us who it is." Ned's gaze turned to her, full of pain. "I cannot. The laws of death bind me. But hear me now. Your enemy is not only one hand, one dagger. It is the doubt that tears you apart. If you cannot stand together, then the knife will cut deeper than flesh. It will cut the pack in two." Sansa's breath shook. "Father." Ned's eyes softened as he looked at her. "You are strong, Sansa, stronger than you know. But strength without trust is weakness. And you, Arya, your blade is sharp, but it cannot shield you from loneliness. A wolf alone is prey. A pack survives together." The sisters' eyes met, their father's words sinking like stones in their hearts. For the first time in weeks, they saw not enemies, not rivals, but blood, the little girls who once played in the yard, who once dreamed of songs and swords, who once clung to their father's hand. And then, from the shadows' movement, a figure stepped into the Godswood. Cloaked and hooded, a dagger glinting in hand. The blade shone pale in the moonlight, and on its hilt, the direwolf of House Stark. Arya's instincts flared. She drew her own blade in an instant. Sansa gasped, stepping back. Bran's eyes widened. The cloaked figure rushed forward, the dagger raised. But before it could strike, a shadowy hand shot out, cold and spectral, seizing the arm mid-swing. The ghost of Ned Stark stood between his children and the assassin, his grip unyielding despite his form of smoke and sorrow. "Not my blood," he growled, his voice shaking the night. "Never again." The assassin struggled, the dagger trembling, but Ned's ghost held fast. Arya lunged forward, her blade flashing, cutting deep into the attacker's arm. The hood fell back, revealing a face twisted with rage. One of the Stark cousins, who had long been cast aside, bitter at their branch being forgotten. Hungry for the crown that sat on Sansa's head, the betrayer screamed, the dagger clattering to the ground. Arya held her blade at their throat, her eyes burning with fury. Sansa stepped forward, her voice trembling but strong. "You would raise a hand against your queen? Against your blood?" The cousins spat, their voice full of venom. "The North belongs to all Starks, not just you. You sit in your father's seat, but you do not deserve it. I would have taken it, and no one would have stopped me." Ned's ghost loomed above them, his eyes blazing. "I bled for my house, I died for my blood, and you would stain it with treachery. You are no wolf, you are carrion." The cousin's defiance faltered under his gaze. For a moment they looked small, broken, their rage no match for the weight of Ned Stark's spirit. Arya pressed her blade harder, but Sansa lifted a hand. "No, enough blood. Let them live. But let all the North see what happens to those who betray their kin." The betrayer was dragged away, their cries fading into the cold night. When the Godswood was quiet again, Arya turned to her father's ghost. "You saved us." Ned's form flickered, his face softer now, at peace for the first time. "No, Arya, you saved yourselves. You stood together. And that is all I ever wanted." Sansa stepped closer, tears shining in her eyes. "Will we see you again?" Ned shook his head slowly. "No, my watch has ended. The North is yours now. Keep it, protect it. And remember, the lone wolf dies, but the pack survives." The wind rose, carrying his form into mist, into snow, into silence. The sisters stood side by side beneath the heart tree, the weight of his words heavy in their hearts. Bran watched quietly, his pale eyes closing. For the first time in years, peace seemed to settle over Winterfell. Their father was gone once more, but his spirit lived on, not in shadows or whispers, but in the bond they had nearly broken, and this time the pack would not fall.